Now the method's going to be post, because we're going to be using the post variables to post it through, so they're not visible in the URL. So the form action, what's this going to be? Now we're out of PHP, so what we need to do is break back into PHP here and end PHP here, and we're going to do this all on one line. I'm going to say echo $_server, and remember your line terminator there. Inside here I'm going to say PHP_self. Now my text editor is highlighting this as green. Don't worry, it looks a bit spooky, but this is just due to my text editor's syntax highlighting and the fact we're actually using HTML and embedding PHP into it. Now there are some security issues with using server PHP self. What we need to do is ensure that HTML data, things like iframes, aren't submitted with this. So we need to use the HTML entities function and wrap that just around there, and that just gives us a bit of added security in our form. Now let's go ahead and just refresh the page. You can see that now if we click on view page source, you can see that the action is now relative to the current page that I'm on, which is guestbook.php, and it's included this full URL as well. So by just by viewing the source, we can see that this has worked. Now what we need to do is just go on and create the name, email and the message fields in order for the user to submit their data. So let's go ahead and say strong. We're going to create some strong tags and just say post something. And we're going to break down, and we're going to say name and break down. Input type is text. Obviously we're submitting text data. The name of this is going to be guestbook_name, and I think that's about, oh no, we need the max length as well, obviously. So max length is equal to 25, remember. Now this can be modified. Someone could obviously save this HTML page, modify it and resubmit with more than 25. They could modify this value. So we're also going to be including checks in PHP later, so never just leave your max length like this. Okay, so let's break down, and we need to say email, and we need to break down again. Input type equals, and this is text again. Name this time is guestbook email, and the max length for this, like we discussed earlier, is 255. Break down again, and our message. Break down text area this time, so we're not using an input type equals text, we're using a text area. We're going to set the name of this to guestbook message. We're going to set the rows and columns attributes. This is the rows and columns, so this is just for aesthetic purposes. Rows, columns could be about 30, rows could be about 6. This gives us a nice size, and we can also set a max length as well. Again, that's 255. So now that we've done that, we need to create obviously a submit button. So input type equals submit, value equals post. That's all we need. So this is our button that's going to submit our form to this page using this method. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our page and test this out. So F5. Okay, so it's got post something, name, email and message. So I'm just going to make that a bit shorter and that a bit longer, and we can see the difference there. That looks a lot nicer. Okay, so when we click post, this should submit everything back to guestbook.php. We can't really see that happening at the moment, but we know it works. So just while I'm here, I'm just going to create a horizontal line above the form, just to separate our form where we are submitting everything to where we're going to be displaying everything. So now that we've got our HTML form complete, this is going to allow us to submit values to our database, and then we're going to be displaying them back to the user after that. So whether the user has submitted, we're always going to be displaying. So inside of here, we're going to be doing absolutely everything. We don't need to include any checks anywhere else for submitted values, or whether we're just landing on the page, because once the user has submitted their data, we're going to be displaying it back to them anyway. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, follow along the method that I'm using. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to establish how we're going to be creating this timestamp value when we submit our form. And it's extremely simple. All we need to do is we need to specify a variable. I'm just going to call this time, and this is going to be equal to time, the time function, and we're not supplying any arguments in here. This value here, or this function here, is going to produce the current Unix timestamp, and that's going to be applied into this variable here. So that's done. We also need an array that's going to store any errors. When we're submitting, the first thing we need to check for is, are all these full? They're all going to be required fields. The second thing we're going to check for is if, the second thing we're going to check for is whether they are greater than their specified amount. So if name is greater than 25, email and message are greater than 255, and we need somewhere to store the current error messages. So we're creating a more an easier flowing way of checking for error messages. And if you don't understand this concept, then you will hopefully pick it up as we go through. So let's just create a variable called errors, and we're going to set that to an array. Okay, so now the first thing we need to do is check if obviously the fields have been submitted, and if they exist, if they're set. And if they are set, this means that the user has submitted the form, and we can continue with the rest of our checks and putting the data into the database. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an if statement. The first block is going to be whether if the form has been submitted, and we're not going to include an else block, because otherwise we just want to display the data to the user, and that's not going to be in an else block because we want to display the user data to the user anyway. So down here we're going to display the data, or the entries rather.